In the name of God the Father, the only begotten Son, and God the Holy Spirit, owner and model of perfection, it is our fervent prayer that your blessings are upon our efforts to honor you through this program, the mission of which is to broadcast well-thought concepts, designs, and critiques of life sectors affected by the fusion of profit and non-profit service ventures in human resource management. This is our humble gift of consilience to the world at its critical period of living and existing. May the fruits of your love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control be brightly emanated to honor you, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Dr. Bo Kim is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. She earned her Bachelor of Science, Master of Engineering, and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She completed postdoctoral fellowships at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs (VA), Boston Healthcare System in Health Systems Engineering and Health Services Research, at the New England Veterans Engineering Resource Center and the VA Center for Healthcare Organization and Implementation Research, or CHOIR, respectively. Her research interests are in applying interdisciplinary methodologies through incorporating diverse stakeholder perspectives toward studying the quality and implementation of mental health services. Dr. Kim joined CHOIR as an investigator in 2015, receiving a Career Development Award from the VA New England Healthcare System to study care transitions from specialty mental health to primary care. She serves as an implementation scientist for VA's Behavioral Health and Bridging the Care Continuum Quality Enhancement Research Initiative programs, and she first authored one of 5 abstracts chosen as Best of Dissemination and Implementation at the 2018 Conference on the Science of Dissemination and Implementation in Health, sponsored by the National Institutes of Health and Academy Health. She received the Mentor of the Year award in 2019 and in 2020 from the Harvard South Shore Psychiatry Residency Training Program, and she was appointed earlier this year as an associate editor for the journal Implementation Research and Practice. Dr. Bo Kim's presentation today will be on the application of stakeholder science in human resource management.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you all today a topic that my colleagues and I find central to our work, which is stakeholder science. I look forward to exploring the topic together today in terms of its application to human resources management. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that I have no conflicts of interest to report and that the views to be shared are those that my colleagues and I hold as our own. Much of the materials that I will be covering today is available through our publication cited here, which of course would not have been possible without the leadership of and guidance from my co-author colleagues listed here. So let us get started with some definitions that are relevant to our discussion today. So there are many definitions of the word stakeholder, and one that I found to be quite relevant to today's topic is that stakeholders are people and organizations that have a stake in an issue that would affect them or their organization. So I like to think of a stakeholder as any entity that either impacts or is impacted by an action. In our case, that is taken by an organization. So, given that definition of stakeholders, stakeholder theory now is a theory by Edward Freeman in 1984, which posits that an organization's success depends on its ability to create value for all of its stakeholders, not just those who stand to profit. So, in other words, all stakeholders ought to believe that their organization's actions are doing them some good, getting them closer to where they want to be. Now, given how we think of stakeholders and of stakeholder theory, stakeholder science is a field of study that aims to methodically grow knowledge to predict stakeholder related phenomena. For example, by hypothesizing and testing characteristics or behaviors of stakeholders that lead to organizational success. So, what would an organization that is mindful of its stakeholders be concerned with? So, these are some key questions that such an organization would be asking. We will be coming back to these questions, but I just wanted to introduce them to you early on. They are: who are our current and potential stakeholders? Some may be entities that immediately come to mind, whereas others may be less obvious. What are their interests and rights? In other words, what do they have in their power to do? Next, how does each stakeholder affect us, both individually and potentially as a group? And then we also want to think about how do we affect each stakeholder, both in planned and unplanned ways? And importantly, what assumptions do we make about each stakeholder? How do we know what we know? And is that actually accurate as of now? So, given these considerations that stakeholder science is concerned with, I think that it is actually time to make very explicit why are we thinking about stakeholder science for human resources management? As many of you taking part in today's event are probably familiar with, human resources management is an organizational function that focuses on strategically managing its people. Their key tasks include deploying, training, engaging, and getting the most productivity out of the people who make up the organization, and importantly, while holding up the organization's culture and core values. So, those people who make up the organization definitely impact and are impacted by the organization's actions. In other words, the people are the organization's stakeholders to whom the stakeholder theory that we just discussed applies. So, in turn, stakeholder science can then inform human resources management on methods that can be applied to create value for those stakeholders and thereby drive organizational success. So let's talk a little bit more about creating value for stakeholders. It, of course, starts with well understanding what the stakeholders consider to be value to them. It is not uncommon then for the next logical consideration to be, do those values of the stakeholders align with the values of the organization? This is, of course, an important consideration, and beyond central goals of an organization that may be difficult to sway, human resources management has been increasingly focused on the nimble nature of organizations to constantly be redefined with input from its stakeholders. Then the question actually becomes, how can stakeholders' values be aligned with organizational values? And answering this question, of course, cannot be done without both the organization understanding its stakeholders and the stakeholders understanding their organization. Therefore, as a mechanism for fostering that understanding, stakeholder engagement in organizational endeavors and decision making is essential. So, I would like to talk to you about a 3-step plan that we devised for engaging stakeholders. The plan is rooted in management science literature, and we are currently applying these steps actively for getting healthcare systems to adopt treatments and processes for delivering care that have been scientifically studied and have a strong evidence base. Although my colleagues and I are applying these steps in the field of healthcare, it is really important to note here that the steps are actually industry agnostic. So, in other words, the steps are applicable to any organization that is really looking to pursue endeavors that require stakeholder engagement. And in today's case, as we are now discussing, for optimal human resources management. So, the 3 steps at a glance are here, and we will go into a bit more detail about each of them. The first step is for human resources management to ask questions to identify all relevant stakeholders. And then the second step is to map those identified stakeholders to one of 4 specific stakeholder groups. And then the third step, depending on the groups to which the stakeholders are mapped, is to select specific strategies to engage the identified stakeholders in pursuing organizational endeavors. So let's start with step 1, which is to ask questions to identify stakeholders. For that, let us think back on the key questions that we touched on earlier in the discussion, which once again are, who are our current and potential stakeholders. What are their interests or rights? How does each stakeholder affect us? And how do we affect each stakeholder? And what assumptions do we make about each stakeholder? So, to be as systematic as possible from this very first step of identifying any and all stakeholders, we recommend that human resources management completes what is called a stakeholder identification table. So the stakeholder identification table looks as shown here on this slide, a version which we adapted from how it is used in the health policy sector. So each stakeholder that comes to mind, we want to specify whether they are known to already be a stakeholder, so currently impacting or are being impacted by the organization's endeavors, or that they have the potential to impact or be impacted by the organization's endeavors. We also want to make very explicit the position that they hold in the organization, as well as both their interests and their rights as they pertain to the position that they hold. And since they are being listed as a stakeholder, they are, of course, expected to affect the organization's endeavors. How exactly they are expected to affect the organization is the next item to fill out in the table. And reciprocally, how the organization's endeavors are likely to affect the stakeholder is then included into the table as well, both immediate effects as well as effects further down the road. And then the assumptions that human resources management holds about the stakeholder is also very important to acknowledge here. For instance, they might be a supervisor who oversees an organization's standard operating procedures. So we may assume that they would not want the procedures to change, when in fact, they might very well be in a position to want an improvement to the procedures to make it simpler for them to supervise. And then the last two items on the list here relate to relationships that the stakeholder has with other stakeholders, whether their perspectives are likely to be affected by alliances that they have with others, and also whether they are opinion leaders who others look to in making up their own minds. And especially if other stakeholders who this stakeholder is allied with and or look to, this stakeholder for guidance are important stakeholders for the organization, then it is really important to specify so here on the table so that that can be taken into account in planning for stakeholder engagement. Now, the second step is for human resources management to map the identified stakeholders to one of four groups. So Freeman articulates four groups of stakeholders as supportive, mixed blessing, non-supportive, and marginally supportive. So supportive stakeholders are those for whom the organization's endeavors will create value, and they themselves see that to be the case. Mixed blessing stakeholders are those who see that the organization's endeavors could create value for them, but they are also concerned with those endeavors disrupting their established routines, which they likely have grown very accustomed to and are familiar with. Non-supportive stakeholders are those who consider the organization's endeavors to be counter to actions that create value for them. And then marginally supportive stakeholders are those who see the importance of what the organization is trying to do, but may also feel that the way in which the organization is pursuing those endeavors does not necessarily prioritize creating value for them. The assignment of stakeholders into supportive, mixed blessing, non-supportive, and marginally supportive groups is really helpful for systematically thinking through how much human resources management can expect each of those stakeholders to potentially cooperate or impede the organization's endeavors. So on the screen here is a matrix that you see that helps visualize this, where you can see the supportive stakeholders in the bottom left corner who are highly likely to cooperate, and the non-supportive stakeholders in the top right corner who are inclined to impede the organization's endeavors. Important to keep in mind is also the dynamic nature of stakeholders. So depending on their changing interests and what they consider to be value, stakeholders may very well change from being in one group to being in another group. So this is all the more reason to be very mindful of what exactly to do for engaging stakeholders in each of the groups with strategies that are specified for the particular group. And that is what step 3 is about. Human resources management selecting and planning the engagement strategy for each group of stakeholders. So supportive stakeholders have high potential for cooperation and low potential for impediment. So the strategy that we recommend human resources management to take when it comes to supportive stakeholders is to involve. So we want to involve these stakeholders from planning through executing the organizational endeavors, making sure to keep them as supportive stakeholders. And doing so means regularly checking in with them, providing them with frequent updates, and constantly seeking their input throughout. Now, mixed blessing stakeholders have high potential for cooperation, but also high potential for impediment. So, the strategy that we recommend human resources management to take when it comes to mixed blessing stakeholders is to collaborate. Because these stakeholders could pose hard questions, it is seemingly easiest to actually avoid them, but especially to make sure that they do not turn non supportive, which we will talk about in a second. We recommend inviting these stakeholders to the decision making table and actively having their perspectives shape the direction in which the organization moves. Now, non supportive stakeholders have low potential for cooperation and high potential for impediment. So, the strategy that we recommend human resources management to take when it comes to non supportive stakeholders is to defend. Organizational endeavors that are central to the organization's mission, of course, need to move forward, even if there are non supportive stakeholders. So, to minimize impediment as much as possible, there still can be a negotiation with these stakeholders on not whether the endeavors will be pushed forth, because they have to be, but for example, co identifying with them how, when, or where the endeavors are pursued so that these stakeholders really feel that their voices are heard and also know that the organization values their perspectives. Now, finally, marginally supportive stakeholders have low potential for cooperation and also low potential for impediment. The strategy that we recommend human resources management to take when it comes to marginally supportive stakeholders is to monitor. Again, stakeholders may change groups at any moment due to both expected and unexpected causes. So it is really important to continuously monitor these stakeholders' perspectives and, whenever possible, create spaces through which to continue communicating with them and nudging them closer to becoming supportive stakeholders over time. So we've talked through the 3-step plan that human resources management can use to engage stakeholders and with organizations leaving multiple endeavors at any point in time. It might be helpful to think about now for which types of endeavors might following this plan be particularly beneficial. In deciding whether or not to enact the plan for an endeavor, we found it very helpful to think through whether the endeavor requires input from stakeholders to identify areas for improvement, to even know where to get started. If that's the case, then yes, move forward with the step plan. Also, we tend to think through whether an endeavor has stakeholders who are in particularly strong positions to impact, in other words, cooperate with or impede the endeavor, then another yes for deciding to enact the 3-step plan. Of course, pushing the plan forward requires both effort and time. So before human resources management moves forward with it, it is also helpful to think through potential missed opportunities in not pursuing stakeholder engagement through an explicit plan such as this one, when it might be beneficial to do so. So both short term and longer term, not engaging stakeholders could really prevent them from trusting that the organization cares for their perspectives and therefore may grow less willing to support the organization's goals. Also, by not strategizing specifically for the different stakeholder groups, that could prevent optimally selecting strategies that can be used for each group, as is being studied in the field of stakeholder science. So, in summary, applying stakeholder science to human resources management is about first, taking the people of the organization, who are, of course, the focus of human resources management, to be critical stakeholders who both impact and are impacted by organizational endeavors. Next, we talked about a 3-step plan for engaging stakeholders that draws on management science literature, which includes step 1, identifying the stakeholders, step 2, classifying them into groups, and step 3, selecting strategies for their engagement. And then finally, this really is all meant to be able to maximize stakeholder cooperation while minimizing stakeholder impediment of organizational endeavors. And ultimately, this underscores, as the stakeholder theory posits, to create value for stakeholders to drive organizational success. So that brings me to the end of the prepared materials for this presentation, and please do not hesitate to reach me at the email address that you see here as items arise that you would like to discuss further. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be a part of this important event today.
It is my great privilege to introduce Sir Anatoly Karpov-Pahonar-Bas. Sir Anatoly is a lifelong learner. He finished the degree Bachelor of Science in Physics, Master of Arts in Education, and Master of Public Administration at Silliman University, Philippines. In the US, he completed 2 diplomas, Customer Service Specialist and Administrative Assistant Professional at Computer System Institute. Sir Bas also passed the following certification at Google Analytics Academy: Google Analytics for Beginners, Advanced, 360, and Power Users. At present, he is studying Master of Science in Information Technology with double concentration in Cybersecurity and IT Management. This seminar is his first opportunity as a speaker in online platform. Sir Bas presents on the topic Data Analytics in Human Resource Management.
Hi everyone, this is Anatoly Karpov-Pahonar-Bas. It is my honor to be part of this online webinar, and I'd like to share my screen first. Please bear with me. So my presentation is about data analytics. First and foremost, I'm happy to be back to my dear old Silliman, because I've been in Silliman for 15 years, and this is one of the fruitful years that I have in my life. And I'd like to thank Dr. Alice Lavinia to be invited into this seminar. So my presentation is about data analytics in human resource management. So basically, I will give you some insights and some information about how big data affected human resource management. So this is my agenda. First, I will talk about the history of big data, some operational definition. So basically, I try to define what is big data and what is HR analytics, and what are the tools used in HR analytics. So just a disclosure, I'm not affiliated with the 2 companies that I would be presenting right now. So I'm not affiliated with Bamboo HR or Google Analytics, but I would be using their software in this presentation. So it's better to understand what is big data. So I will give you a brief history of big data. So based on my research, it all started in 1944, but this is on the recorded history. We all know that Asian people already use data, but not as big as we know right now. So in 1944, Fremont Ryder from Wesleyan University publishes The Scholar and the Future of the Research Library. Mr. Ryder estimates that the American university libraries were doubling in size every 16 years. So this is really a good indication that big data has started 6 decades ago. He speculates with this growth rate that the Yale University in 2040, so that's approximately less than 3 decades from now, will have approximately 200 million volumes, which will occupy around 6,000 miles of shelves. And they would be needing a cataloging staff of around 6,000 persons. But we all know that because of data science, this will not be feasible because of a lot of factors. So we will be using big science or big data science rather, so that we would able to minimize the hiring process or hiring a lot of people. And in 1961, Derek Price publishes Science Since Babylon. So he charts the growth of scientific knowledge by looking at the growth in the number of scientific journals and papers. He concludes that the number of new journals has grown exponentially rather than linear. So the growth is not linear, but exponentially. So it will double every 15 years and increasing by a factor of 10 every half century. And Mr. Price calls this as the law of exponential increase. So on the next few decades, in 1967, Meron and Demain published an automatic data compression. The information explosion noted the recent years makes it essential that storage requirements for all information must be kept minimum. This is because we occupy more space and the capacity to store data is also limited during that time. And in 1971, Arthur Miller wrote The Assault on Privacy. And according to Mr. Miller, too many information handlers seems to be measure a man by a number of bits of storage capacity his dossier or occupy. And 4 years later, the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication in Japan starts conducting the information flow census. It tracked the volume of information circulating in Japan. And 5 years later, Chomsky gives a talk, Where Do We Go From Here? At the fourth IEEE Symposium on Mass Storage System. He said that those associated with storage distances long ago realized that the Parkinson's first law may be paraphrased to describe our industry. Data expands to fill the space available. So in the next few decades, in 1981, the Hungarian Central Statistics Office starts a research project to account for the country's information industries, including measuring information volume in bits. So bits is quite related to a byte. So it's basically a character or a measure of data. While in August 1983, Iltel de la Sola Pool publishes the Tracking Flow of Information in Science, which is a very popular scholarly publication, looking at the growth trends in 17 major communication media in 1960 to 1977. Meanwhile, in July 1986, Mr. Becker published Can Users Really Absorb Data at Today's Rates or Tomorrow in Data Communication? So basically, data is expanding enormously, and will humans or will we able to absorb the enormous expansion of data? In September 1990, Dennings publishes Saving All Bits in American Scientist. According to Peter, the imperative for scientists to save all bits forces us to do an impossible situation. So basically, how to store all data and how to acquire those data. While in 1990 to 2000, digital storage becomes more cost effective for storing data than paper. So we call it the evolution of storage system. It was published in IBM Systems Journal in July 1st, 2003. And in October 1997, Michael Cox and David Ellsworth published Application Control Demand Paging for Out-of-Score Visualization in the Proceedings of IEEE 8 Conference on Visualization. Michael Lesh, meanwhile, published How Much Information is There in the World? So this is a big question. Lesh concludes that there must maybe around few thousand petabytes, not megabytes or terabytes, but petabytes. All told, and the production of tape and disc will reach that level by the year 2000 or 3 years after. In April 1998, Mashley, a chief scientist at SGI, presents at the USNIX meeting a paper entitled Big Data and the Next Wave of Infarctus. While in October 1998, Kaufman and Andrew Oxford published the size and growth rate of the internet. They conclude that the growth rate of traffic of the public internet, while lower than it is often cited, is still 100% per year, much higher than the traffic on other networks. So there's a big explosion of information in the information superhighway. And in August 1999, Gerson, David, Michael Cox, David Ellsworth, and Robert Hames published Visually Exploring Gigabyte Datasets in Real Time in the Communication of the ICM. It is the first CACM article where the big data was first coined. And in October 1999, Berson, Kenwright, Hames joined David Banks, Robert Van Der, and Sam Osselton on the panel Automation or Interaction, What Best for the Big Data. While in October 2000, Peter Lehman and Han Varian at University of California in Berkeley published How Much Information. So this is the first attempt to have a comprehensive study to quantify in computer terms the total amount of new and information, not counting copies, created in the world annually and stored in 4 physical media. So these media are paper, film, optical, which are CDs and DVDs, which is virtually not being used anymore, except you will watch a movie or you will buy something to watch or rent a CD or in a library, and magnetic. And also in November 2000, Francis Dybord presented the 8th World Congress of Econometric Society, a paper entitled Big Data Dynamics Factor Models of Macroeconomic Measurement and Forecasting, in which he states recently much good science, whether physical, biological, or social, has been forced to confront and often benefited from the big data phenomenon. In 2000 and 2010, particularly in February 2001, Doug Laney, an analyst with the Meta Group, publishes a research note entitled 3D Data Management, Controlling Data Volume, Velocity, and Variety. A decade later, the 3Vs, which is very popular right now in data science, which is very important: volume, velocity, and variety. Volume, how big the data is. Velocity, how fast data will be processed. And variety, what are the data being processed. And this generally accepted three defining definitions of big data, although the term itself doesn't appear in Doug's note in that year. In September 2005, Tim O'Reilly publishes What is Web 0.0, in which he asserts that data is the next Intel Inside. Tim, as remarked by Hal Baryan in the personal conversation last year, SQL is the new HTML. And in March 2007, John Grants, David Reinsel, and other researchers at the IDC releases a white paper entitled The Expansion of Digital Universe, a forecast of worldwide information growth through 2010. It is the first study to estimate and forecast the amount of digital data created and replicated each year. Meanwhile, in January 2008, Brett Swanson and George Gilder published Estimating the Exaflood, in which they project the US IP traffic could reach 1 zettabyte by 2015, and that the US Internet of 2015 will be at least 50 times larger than that year. And a few months later, Cisco released the Cisco Visual Networking Index, Forecasting and Methodology, 2007 to 2012, part of the ongoing initiative to track and forecast the impact of visual networking applications. It predicts the IP traffic of nearly double every 2 years through 2012, and it will reach half a zettabyte in 2012. Meanwhile, in September 2008, a special issue of the Nature of Big Data examines what big data said for contemporary science. And a few months later, Bryant, Karts, and Lasowaska published Big Data Computing, Creating Revolutionary Breakthroughs in Commerce, Science, and Society. And this is available as a PDF if you will go to the information superhighway. And they wrote, just a search engine has transformed how we access information, other forms of big data computing, and will transform activities of companies and scientific researchers, medical practitioners, and our nation's defense and intelligence operations. In December 2009, Bog James Short published How Much Information? The 2009 report on American consumers. The study finds that in 2008, Americans consume information around 1.3 trillion hours, or an average of 12 hours per day. So that's really amazing. Imagine it's more than the average work time of an American, which is basically around 8 hours. In February 2010, Kenneth Cooker published in The Economist a special report titled Data, Data Everywhere. He wrote that the world contains an unimaginably vast amount of digital information, which is getting even faster, more rapidly. So basically, I just want to present how big data has transformed, and one field that which is all familiar is communication. So as you can see here, that we used to have one-way broadcast and now transformed to two-way communication. And from 1986 to 2007, it exponentially increased to the 7th power. And here, from 1.09 exponent of 0.8, it grew almost 4 times in terms of speed, or megabytes per second. So this is an illustration of how quickly our communication capacity in terms of broadcast and telecommunication fill up our available information storage. So in 2011, Hilbert and Lopez published the World Technological Capacity to Store, Communicate, and Compute Information in Science. They estimate the world's information storage capacity grew at a compound annual growth rate of 25% per year between 1986 to 2007. Meanwhile, in May 2011, James Manica, Michael Coy, Brad Brown, Jacques Boghin, and Richard Dogs, and Charles Roxburgh, and Angela Hang Byers of the McKinsey Global Institute, or MGI, published Big Data, the Next Frontier for Innovation, Competition, and Productivity. They estimate that by 2009, nearly all sectors in the US economy has at least an average of 200 terabytes of stored data. That's approximately twice the size of the US retailer Walmart's data warehouse in 1999, per company with more than 1,000 employees. So from studying the history, we now go to operational definition of big data. So this operational definition came from Boyd and Crawford when they published Critical Questions for Big Data in Information, Communication, and Society. So they define big data as a cultural, technological, and scholarly phenomenon that rests on 3 interplay. First, technology. So big data is really correlated with technology, maximizing computational power and algorithm accuracy to gather, analyze, link, and compare large data set. So you compare A to B, or you compare a set of AB to a set of CD. And then analysis, drawing on large data set to identify patterns in order to make economic, social, technical, and legal claims. So from the big data, we transform data to insights. Insights are data or patterns in which will help us decide on certain important decisions. And the third one is methodology, the widespread belief that large data sets offer a larger form of intelligence and knowledge that can generate insights that were previously impossible with the aura of truth, objectivity, and accuracy. So data is really important so that we will try to have the best data-driven decision that we should have. In 2012, President Obama announced that there's a big data research development initiative with around 200 million commitment, citing a need to improve the ability to extract valuable insights from data and generate the pace of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And also, Harvard Business Review names data scientists as one of the sexiest jobs of the 21st century, as more companies recognize the need to sort and gain insight from unstructured data, demand for data scientists soar. So in terms of the global market in 2013, big data reaches around 10 billion. And for the first time in 2014, more mobile devices access internet than desktop computers in the United States. So there are more, as smartphones become popular, more people use a small computer like the smartphone than the traditional desktop computer. And the rest of the world follows this trend 2 years later. And in 2016, 90% of the world's data has created the last 2 years alone, and IBM reports 2.5 quintillion billions of data is created every year. If you try to imagine, there are around 18 zeros, so not billion, not trillion, but it's quintillion. And in 2017, IDC forecast big data analytics market would reach around 203 billion in 2020. So in terms of allied market research, reports that the big data and business analytics hit 193 billion in 2019 and estimate that it will grow 420.98 billion by 2027. That's around 6 years from now at a compound annual growth rate of 10.9%. So in terms of HR analytics, what is HR analytics? It's also known as people analytics, HR analytics, work analytics, or talent analytics. So basically, what is the definition of HR analytics? It is the use of big data or data-driven information in managing human resources. So big data will equate to insight. So when an organization uses a data-driven approach, it means that it will make strategic decisions based on collection, analysis, and interpretations or insights. So we coined the term insights. So I will be presenting to you. I'm limited to a few minutes right now. So I'll go to an example of how HR correlate to data analytics. So this is a software which I'm not employed with. It is Bamboo HR. So it is access levels, benefits, centralized data, move online, onboarding, performance, recruitment, and reporting. So I would be stopping my PowerPoint from this point, and we'll be shifting to my here. So I'll be opening. So this is an example of how data analytics can be used in an HR environment. So as you can see, this is the dashboard. You can put the company logo here. And then you can see people, hiring, reports, and the files. So for instance, for hiring, you would be hiring this plantilla, like an IT security engineer in Milan. And then you can also have candidates. So you can also create a talent pool. And as you can see in the dashboard, you can see how many hours individual can be used for sick leave in terms of vacation leave and COVID-19 related absence. And who are the people that reports to me. And in terms of the documents, so you can upload resume, signed documents, you can connect DocuSign, you can make task list attachment or workflow attachment. And the benefits. So what are the benefits that you have? How much the employee pays and the company pays, and training. For example, how about unlawful harassment is due on November 10, 2022. So it will tell the employee when to get it and what are the assets. So basically, what are the things assigned to certain employee and what are you can also add some notes and emergency contact. So we go to the home and go back to the dashboard. So just to tell you that this is so this is the dashboard. You can see what are the things happening in the company. And this is not a real company. I just created it just for the presentation. And I'll stop the sharing that screen. I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So that's basically Bamboo HR. It has a trial version and you can always get this powerful tool to build data and HR together. now is about Google Analytics. So if you have a Google account, practically your Gmail account, you can have an analytics account too. So this is just an example of an insight or the data derived from Google Analytics. So stop my screen and share my screen again. So Google Analytics is basically used, if you can see in the screen right now, it's basically used for search engine organization or SEO or marketing. But this data can be also be used in your human resource so that you would able to manage your human resource effectively. So you can do the demographics overview. So you can see how many are using right now. You can, for example, if you like to view the Philippines, so here, so it's around, that's the data usage from January to December 31, 2020. So you click that. You also have demographics. So users by country. So you can also have percentages. And you can also track engagement. So engagement. So you can see graphs here, how the users, so there are around 48,000 users and 33,000 are new users. So basically this is Google Analytics. I apologize that we have limited time, but just to see you that, like here, screen view, user engagement, level start, level end, quick play, and post score. So you can see that you can see the categories in each day. Sharing my screen again, PowerPoint. And these are my references. And the final note, data is really big right now. If you would go to cloud computing or you want to become a data scientist, there's really a good demand with this field. And data is enormous because we have a lot of data from your Facebook posts, from when you use your Venture card, when you use a bus, or when you what are the shows that you are using, especially if these shows are being tracked by your television set or in the internet, what are the sites that you are using. The best example that I can give on how data analytics or vis-a-vis business intelligence would show is when you use Amazon, when you buy one important item, it can be matched to other items. The same with HR and analytics. Humans are the most important asset in the company, but through data-driven decision, you would able to have the best decision for your company. And I would appreciate the feedback that you would have. You can email me, or if you want a copy of my PowerPoint presentation, I'm more than happy to send you. So it's anatoly.bus at student.potomac.edu. So thank you so much, and I appreciate all of your time, and happy holidays, and I hope you would stay healthy and safe, and I'm really excited for next year, and I really hope that we have a better year for the next coming days. And thank you, Dr. Lavinia, and to all organizers. I'm really honored to be part of this intellectual engagement. Thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.
I have the honor to introduce to you Sir Edward N. Sibota, PhD in Business Administration candidate with focus on Human Resource Management. Sir Sibota's Master's in Business Administration degree is also in Human Resource Management. He finished his Master's from the University of Nairobi, at which he is currently pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Business Administration. Sir Edward Sibota is a certified public secretary of Kenya. He is also a certified human resource professional. For current work experiences, Sir Sibota holds the position of Assistant Registrar for Recruitment and Training in the Office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Human Resource and Administration of the University of Nairobi, Kenya. Sir Edward N. Sibota will lecture on the management of human resource in the post-COVID-19 era, the case of higher education in Kenya.
Hello everyone, my name is Edward Sibota. I am from Kenya. I am a human resource professional practicing at the University of Nairobi, where I am also a student in the degree of business administration, specializing in human resource management in the same university. Let me take this opportunity to thank you all for this opportunity that you've created so that we can come together as practitioners and scholars and share our experiences as on matters that relate to the management of human resource in the field of higher education. My lecture today is on the management of human resource management in the post-COVID pandemic era, the case of higher education in Kenya. I'll go straight to the summary of this lecture. One, I'll do the introduction of higher education sector in Kenya. Two, I discuss the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on education in Kenya. Three, I'll also discuss the challenges affecting or rather facing the higher education sector in Kenya, especially in the context of COVID-19. And then four, I'll discuss the strategies that have been adopted by management of universities in Kenya to manage human resource in Kenyan universities. And then I'll do a conclusion of my lecture. Introduction on higher education sector in Kenya is that Kenya's higher education sector comprises a total of 70 institutions. And the 70 institutions here, I mean universities. And this makes the sector actually one of the biggest education sector, systems in Africa. The sector comprises of 33 public universities and 37 private universities. And as you all know, that universities play a very critical role in teaching, research, and community service all over the world. And this being a very sensitive area, it is important that we discuss it and share our experiences on how education sector, higher education sector in Kenya has been affected and what Kenya has done as a country to mitigate against the challenges that have come as a result of the COVID pandemic. Let me discuss now on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the education sector in Kenya. Globally, education, training, and research are important platforms for national socio-economic transformation. In light of this, the Kenyan government, like other governments across the world, recognizes the importance of all citizens receiving education and training in order to achieve Kenya's Vision 2030 and the Millennium Development Goals of the globe. In order to achieve the National Development Goals, quality and relevant education and training is very critical. Conversely, major challenges emerge in enhancing and ensuring quality, equity, accessible, and relevance in education and training in Kenya. The most recent challenge in the sector of education is the coronavirus pandemic outbreak that affected all of us in the world. That came in the year 2019 stroke 2020. The COVID-19 virus has affected the education sector globally, resulting to near complete closures of schools, colleges, and universities in Kenya. And this is an experience everywhere in the world. Of course, not only in Kenya, many countries in Africa, and many other countries in the entire world, in Europe and everywhere else. In response to the challenge precipitated by the pandemic, the government of Kenya came up with interventions to prevent the near collapse of the education sector in the country. And let me now look at the challenges that have affected the Kenyan universities in the post-COVID pandemic era. One is the unfavorable working conditions. Number one, working conditions cover a broad range of topics and issues from working time, hours of work, rest periods, and work schedules to remuneration, as well as the physical conditions and the mental demands that exist in the workplace. That is according to International Labour Organization 2020. The COVID-19 crisis has drastically altered working conditions in all universities. Indeed, to ensure their business continuity, most universities have moved to remote working, requiring their employees, that's the lecturers and administrative staff, to work from home as the students take online classes. The work environment has changed from the traditional one to remote working. And remote working has not fully developed in Kenya due to limited internet connectivity, lack of computers, management of work and family and work and family life balance. Further, not all jobs can be done remotely. But the question is, how appropriate is home for university business? The question of home is really important to discuss here, because when universities moved to remote working and the home became the office, that is when a challenge began, because homes are different. How appropriate is your home when you're working from there? For some people, a home can be a single room in the remote part of Kenya, a single room without electricity, just a simple room. To someone else, it is a big house that has connectivity of internet and has electricity. And so the home is not standard. And that is where the challenge became, because working from home is not standard because of the differences in socioeconomic standards of people in Kenya and all over and Africa. It is not easy. It has not become easy even to define what a home is and how that home can be an office to work from. So that was a very important thing that we noted in Kenya, that the working environment changed and became quite unfavorable because working from home did not yield or deliver much because of the inequalities in which a home can be, And the second challenge was staffing. Staffing challenges was really an issue. And let me define what staffing means for the sake of this webinar. That staffing refers to the process of attracting, selecting, and retaining competent individuals to achieve organizational goals. Now, in the case of Kenya, The national wage bill has become uncontrollable due to the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and consequently, the government of Kenya has suspended public service new recruitment for 3 years, for quite some time now, because this was brought so that the government can control the wage bill, because the economy sank and a number of businesses were affected, many businesses closed, and inflation set in, and therefore it was not easy. The wage bill became a burden, paying all the workers, the lecturers, and other staff who work in universities. And this really became an issue and a burden, and therefore government, to contain the inflation and also to contain the ever increasing wage bill, the government of Kenya has suspended public service new recruitment for 3 years, or rather until further notice. At the same time, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has identified 3 universities in Kenya among the top state-owned agencies carrying the biggest financial risks and which should be restructured. And the government of Kenya identified 3 universities, and the University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University, and more universities as among the universities that needed to be restructured to be able to save them from near collapse. And this move, caused many job losses, leading to understaffing in many universities. And this is really a crisis in Kenya, though it is still a challenge, and we hope that it will be able to be contained. The third challenge is performance management. The issue of managing performance became an issue and is still an issue. And let me define what performance management means for the sake of this webinar. Performance management is a continuous process of identifying, measuring, and developing the performance of individuals and work groups, and aligning performance with the strategic goals of the organization. Now, remote working came, and it was the only way for people to work. Lecturers teaching from their houses, online classes, and all these things. But a challenge came. How do you measure performance of people who are working from home, away from the traditional way of measuring people in their official working places, like in the office, where your timing, the time you take to do an assignment is considered. The people there watching you and supervising your work, and therefore your work is able to be measured. But when the remote working came, it was not exactly to measure what people do. Okay, remote working has created challenges relating to employee supervision and performance management. And then the question now was, how do you supervise employees working from home, and how do you measure their performance? That became an issue. And the next challenge was, and still is, the demand for COVID employees. The question is, who are COVID employees? Due to COVID-19 pandemic, universities experienced a shortage of workers suited for remote working. Coming from the background that people are not prepared to work from home, and the Kenyans were used to working from the conventional style, the standard ways of working. You come to the office, you sit in the office and you work from there. You teach, you go to a class, a lecture, and you deliver a lecture in a lecture hall, and there was no need for use of ICT to deliver. Of course, it was important, but when people started working from home, usually actually it became a challenge, and therefore there was now demand for COVID workers, and properly to go deeper and actually look at who are COVID workers. Now, not all employees had the proper digital skills to undertake remote working, hence the necessity to train lecturers and other university workers on use of ICT in order to facilitate online teaching. In this case, the main challenge for human resource departments was and still remains the need to transform these employees into COVID employees. Now, who is a post-COVID employee. This is an employee with the right skills and competences to undertake a remote working. That is a local definition in the context of where we are in Kenya, because it's not a definition you can find in a dictionary or anywhere. It is the definition we gave to only those employees that are able to work from home, people who are skilled, who are able to use ICT, people who have access to internet, people who have the right attitude, people who have the right mentality, and who can work from home or can actually do remote working, not necessarily from home, but just working away from the office and still deliver on their mandate. So that became a challenge. The universities realized all of a sudden that they didn't have this kind of workers. All of the universities had people who are used to doing things the traditional way, and this became a challenge. And so even I posed this challenge to us, all of us here now in this webinar. Who is a COVID employee? That's for the discussion. And as we move, it will continue to be discussed on what are the qualities, what are the attributes of all the qualifications or the competences of people who are able to work from home or do remote working. The next challenge that the Human Resource Department faced, or rather management of universities faced, is the safety and the health challenges of their employees. As you know, employers are responsible for protection of their employees while they are working. And employers must ensure that the workplace is free from any hazard that may psychologically or physically harm them or cause their death. COVID-19 has generated a new occupational hazards like work-life imbalance as a result of working from home, excessive exposure to computers due to online working, burnout and stress-related elements due to understaffing, people's contracts terminated, leaving the remaining few workers to work, and these were very, very serious challenges because all of a sudden people are exposed to a lifestyle that they were never used to, and this posed a healthy issue and a safety issue. Like, take an example of working from home. How do you know, or how do you separate work? You are in your house, and you're working from there, and you are also attending to other domestic, your own personal issues in the house. So it became a challenge to be able to draw a line between work and your personal life. And this became an issue. And as you know, employees are supposed to maintain balance in their work and also as it relates to their life, their personal life. And because of this also gave rise to another challenge, healthy challenge, excessive exposure to computers. Manual work stopped and more people are working from home. And the gadget to use working from home was the computer, and it still is. And that prolonged the exposure of people working from their screens actually became an issue, because really it became a challenge because people had to suffer other challenges also relating to the excessive exposure to computers. And the other issue that came that under this health and safety and health challenge is actually burnout. And as you know, burnouts are really. And with COVID cases at the workplace, how do employers ensure safety of their employees? That's a question that we'll continue to discuss, that we invite all of us to discuss. And the other challenge that came is the issue of managing, reward or compensation. Okay, and as you know, compensation management refers to the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards that the employees receive for performing their job. It encompasses monetary and non-monetary rewards. In giving the example of Kenya, in the 2021 and 2022 fiscal year, the higher education sector budget was reduced by USD 37 million. And as you know, payment of salaries was affected due to reduced exchequer funding. This always leads to delayed payment of salaries, negatively impacting on employee motivation. And universities have had to adopt and explore alternative ways of raising funds to pay salaries and other allowances. The next challenge was the disturbance of industrial peace. There are a number of things that came up as a result of the declining economy, loss of jobs, and I think for the situation in Kenya is that the COVID-19 pandemic created a situation whereby collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs, were not being honored, and they are still not being honored. There are challenges in meeting these obligations due to financial constraints faced by many universities in Kenya. And this resulted in frequent picketing, go slows, and even strikes by lecturers and administrative staff. The other challenge was, and still is, legal implications. To control wage bills, most universities have been compelled to terminate employment contracts of some of the workers, and this often led to battles in the corridors of justice due to unlawful dismissals. Now, let's look at the strategies that universities had to come up with in order to control, or rather mitigate against the challenges that we have just discussed that are facing university workers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. One is implementing flexible work arrangements. Universities must take a radical departure from conventional ways of working and develop and implement HR practices that promote flexible work arrangements, such as the following: remote working, open workplaces, floating hours, and flexibility. Universities must provide sufficient IT assets or resources to meet the needs of employees to help them work from home. And universities must define a regular procedure for separation and determine a boundary between office and the home. And finally, there is a need for remote working policy at the national and at the institutional level. The next strategy is the use of innovative methods to support employees and maintain their health and welfare. Now, this is what Man University should do, and this is what Kenya is trying to do, is to reward active employees. You must, present, or further rather present, rewards that so as to motivate employees at this time, because we noted that lack of motivation was really an issue, and still is an issue in many universities in Kenya, and therefore the university's management must come up with ways of rewarding active employees. Number two is to ensure policies are implemented equally to all remote and in-office workers. This is to ensure that there is fair treatment of all workers, regardless of where they are, whether they are working from home or they are working from the office. And finally, universities must offer additional benefits to compensate employees instead of reducing employee benefits. As you noted, with inflation, when the government was unable to, pay salaries, most universities embraced salary reduction methods. Some people had to take pay cuts, and some had to have their allowances reduced. But this did not work well because it also demotivated employees, and therefore it did not act in the best interest of the universities. But so universities can now offer additional benefits instead of reducing people's benefits, financial benefits, get additional benefits to compensate employees instead of reducing their benefits. And the other strategy is to, how do we address salary pay cuts? The right way is not to continue advising staff to take pay cuts, advising, or rather implementing a policy whereby lecturers are able to have their salary reduced. The universities must discourage pay cuts as a way of managing wage bill costs. Universities must come up with alternative ways, such as encouraging reduction of working hours in the universities. And the next point is, how do we ensure that work-life balance, especially with employees working from home, is maintained? The solution is, or the strategy that Kenya is adopting all over the world at the university, is to train and sensitize employees on work-life balance and time management. The second strategy, the other strategy is on effective measurement of work performance for employees working from home. Now, as we noted, it is not easy. It became a challenge at the start to even think of how to, measure performance of workers that work from home, measuring the performance of lecturers working from home, and it was really a challenge. And what we are now proposing, or rather universities are now adopting, is to set smart targets for employees. In smart here we mean the targets must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic or relevant, and time bound. And then universities must assess employee performance based on tasks and targets allocated. And the next strategy is there's need to align labor laws with the new normal situation at the workplace. You know very well that the new normal arising out of COVID-19 situation, a number of things have changed. Things have changed. There's no longer working together in one office is no longer the issue. The use of masks, it's something that was never heard of. Working in an office and you are separated from your colleagues because of fear of spreading or rather catching the virus, and a number of things that have actually happened, or some of the strategies or practices that have been impressed as a way of curbing the spread of the pandemic contravene the labor laws, and therefore there's a need to initiate a debate on amendment of existing labor laws and practices to be in line with the new normal situation created by the COVID pandemic. The other strategy is there's a need to develop and implement a remote working policy. Universities needed to come up with a remote working policy to guide online working and working from home. And then universities must invest in post-COVID employees. We started defining what a post-COVID employee is. It's still a discussion. The definition is still we are yet to get the right definition, but universities must invest in employees who have the right attitude to work, who are able to learn, and who are able to support online teaching and remote working. And therefore, universities must allocate adequate financial resources to attract and retain lecturers and other university employees suitable to discharge the business of universities during global pandemics such as COVID pandemic in the future. Now, my conclusion is other question: the future of universities in the face of COVID, of pandemics. Now, COVID-19 is certainly not the last global pandemic. The question is, are universities in Kenya and globally prepared to remain relevant to society in the face of global pandemics such as COVID? That's a question for all of us. What is the role of human resource in promoting quality manpower for universities in the face of global pandemics? And then the future of universities in Kenya relies on the following: investment in COVID employees and investing in technology to facilitate online working. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and thank you so much for your time. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
It is a great privilege to introduce to you the Reverend Moon Sun, PhD in Theology. Dr. Moon Sun is a General Board member of the Korea Council of Overseas Schools, or KORKUS. He serves as adjunct professor of Christian Education, College of Theology, Yonsei University. He is a research fellow of 2 institutes at Yonsei University, the Yonsei Unigay Collaborative Institute and the Institute of Convergent Science. Dr. Moon Sun is a senior pastor of Jesus Love Methodist Church. He serves in many important societal bodies, including being the vice president of the Korean Society of Christian Religious Education, or KSCRE. He is the executive director of the Journal of Christian Education in Korea and is a journal editorial board member of the Religious Education Association of the United States of America. Let us welcome Dr. Moon Sun. He will speak on the Christian education nonprofit context of human resource management.
Hello, my name is Dr. Moon Sun at Yonsei University. I'm teaching Christian education at Yonsei University in South Korea. It's a great honor to participate in Fusion 2021. My papers focuses on Christian education, nonprofit context of human resource management. This study focuses on the vulnerability of our society and environment under the COVID-19 pandemic. The medical description about severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus disease 2019, provide a serious manifestation of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and new resilient hope of its vaccination. Moreover, with the perspective of feminist practical theology, so I explored the resilient possibility to reconstitute an ecological relationship between our society and environment. A new type of coronavirus to be confirmed at Wuhan Jin Intan Hospital in Wuhan, Hubei Province, China on 30 December 2019. Has arisen very huge and transformative changes in our world. Scientists had already some experiences to encounter similar coronaviruses in the 23 outbreak of SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, in 2012. However, the Wuhan outbreak coronavirus showed serious and significant spreading traces in the world. The scientists gave a new name as SARS-CoV-2 to occur severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19, to be confirmed by a test called real-time reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction. Scientists reported new coronavirus spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 is at least 10 times stronger tightly than pre-existing SARS-CoV-2 COVID does, binding to a protein of human cell receptor called angiotensin converting enzyme to ACE2. Such viral distinction of SARS-CoV-2 was considered as a main reason to describe global phenomena of pandemic spread. The molecular shell structure of SARS-CoV-2 is covered in each spike made of 3 identical proteins, and the binding domain between the tip of the spike and the human ACE2 receptor describes a main reason to infect the host cell by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, especially drops of carbohydrate on the surface of the spike protein disturb active operation of immune system for the host cell. We can find identical 3 type spikes and binding with ACE2 of human being cells. The symptoms of patients with COVID-19 are diverse and different from a symptomatic experience to mild symptoms such as fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath. But the significant cause of human mortality with COVID-19 is the link with acute respiratory distress syndrome due to diffuse alveolar damage, having the pathologic distinction of hyaline membrane formation in the alveoli in the acute stage. The figure 2 shows diffuse alveolar damage in the acute stage in the logs of patients who died of coronavirus 2019. The sign of arrow directs hyaline membranes. Hyaline proteinous materials are deposited along the dilated alveolar, which are characteristic of diffuse alveolar damage. Here we can find the human logs, diffused alveolar shape. Originally, human normal cell of log is the circle shape. However, we can find diffused alveolar cells of human log. The existence of hyaline membranes attached in the alveolar walls is based on the disease manifestation, acute respiratory distress syndrome associated with diffuse alveolar damage in regard to non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, such as acute lung injury. The effect of vaccines to prevent COVID-19 relates to inducing antibody responses against binding between the trimetallic SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and human ACE2 receptor. Here, antibody responses mean the formation of molecules made by the immune system to neutralize the robust activity SARS-CoV-2 viral replication. The figure 3 shows the effect of vaccination induced by the messenger RNA 1273 vaccine candidates called COVID-19 vaccine Moderna to evaluate in non-human primates against forming viral cell membrane fusion to bind the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and human ACE2 receptor. The distinction of antibody levels about ACE2 binding inhibition between two groups of non-human primates called Rhesus macaque with 10 microgram or 100 microgram of messenger RNA 1273 is clear. Here, phosphate buffered saline means a group of non-human primates not to induce vaccines as a control group, and the letters of convalescence means antibody level of human convalescent phase serum specimens to have a history of combined SARS-CoV-2 infection 1 to 2 months ago. The meaningful consequence of this study is that antibody levels to inhibit the receptor binding domain in serum from 10 microgram dose group and 100 microgram dose group exceed that in serum from the control group as PBS, and that in human convalescent phase serum as convalescent. Moreover, that study reported that the rate of ACE2 binding inhibition in serum from the 100 microgram dose group was 938 times as high as that in serum from the control group and 348 times as high as that in human convalescent phase serum. Here we can find so 10 microgram and 100 microgram doses. So in group, we can find the inhibition, the consequence of binding with three identical spike of coronavirus 19. So the index of COVID-19 pandemic, our society may encounter the significant transformation. The economists predict the decline from the COVID-19 crisis would be the largest annual drop since the Second World War. And then such changes after the pandemic relate to the way of massive government spending. If the opportunity of this recovery is not carefully considered, it may be severe because of social, political, and environmental fractures. Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of medical journal, The Lancet, warned the impact of quarantine by the pandemic spread of COVID-19. Isolation can cause post-traumatic stress, confusion, fear, anger, frustration, and of course, boredom. Some of these effects will be long-lasting. They recommended that periods of isolation should be as short as possible. Working from home might be a welcome pleasure at first, but it also carries the seed of sometimes severe mental trauma. Moreover, the long-term extension of isolation due to the unexpected expansion of COVID-19 disproportionately affected marginal groups in our society, such as colored people, migrant women, and children. Duvakumar study points out higher risk of infectious disease in ethnic minority group or lower socioeconomic group due to limited healthcare access or work in precarious jobs. As of the November 26, 2021, World Health Organization reported 259 million people's confirmed cases of COVID-19 worldwide, including 5 million people's death. Even though 2 years went after the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, its seriousness remains in much worse condition and tends to produce isolated, discriminatory responses to vulnerable groups in our society due to the absence of social inclusion, justice, and solidarity. Joyce-M also focuses on a relationship between Christian soteriological beliefs in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ and the vulnerability of soul abused and oppressed groups of children, women, persons living in poverty, with feminist theological perspectives. With a vulnerable value of service of feminist theological critics, she suggested a new opportunity of feminist hermeneutics to reform, reshape, and re-image unjust power relations embedded in the subordination of women and children. I have an idea that human infection by SARS-CoV-2 encourages the vulnerability of human society in the world, and this vulnerable status of human society relates to the reckless human expansion into the natural landscape. Here, we come to know that a relationship between the spread of new disease and increased encounters of human and wildlife in undeveloped area due to the expansion of deforestation is not unrelated. Recognizing the wildlife trade in China as the first coronavirus infections. Likewise, the vulnerability of human beings and non-human creatures in threat of COVID-19 is comprehensive in our daily lives. Fortunately, feminist practical theology carefully considers a relationship between the human and non-human creation in the experience of interrelatedness and interreliance in the perspective of feminist practical theology to criticize the reproduction of oppressive power relations between the human and non-human creation. I see a new possibility to reconstruct ecological resilience of our society and environment. In the standpoint of feminist practical theology, the Jesus story to carefully consider vulnerable groups such as children, women, and the frail elderly in the Bible newly works as a counter-narrative to transform oppressed discourses in our society and environment. We can easily relate historical life and exclusive bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ as original resources to validate and authenticate divine authority to women in the Bible. A risen Lord comes in this world through a woman's body. A woman gave birth to him. With a new resilient hope of feminist practical theology, our study will focus on reconstituting the vulnerable fragility of our society and environment under the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless.
Firstly, I would like to thank all our expert resources that share their learnings in this broadcast. Thanks to the Silliman Online University Learning, or SOL, for creating a smooth path for this broadcast. Special thanks to Dr. Dave Marshall, Director of SOL, Sir Fredley Bucom, and Sir Stephen Binaro for their countless hours of diligence to put this seamless broadcast together, thanks to Alma Mater Silliman University. The fusion of profit and non-profit has been rendered more visible during this pandemic time. Fusion spells human relations. In a predictive treatise by Glenn P. Jones, creator of Knowledge TV and a University of the Web, he argues that the recipe for a strong economy in the 21st century will be to mix the unique capabilities of non-profit and for-profit organizations. My sharing is a philosophical view of human relations in human resource management, whether for profit, non-profit, or in the fusion of the two entities. My presentation will not go into the evolution of human relations as a theory. I will present it with the assumption that the meaning is understood within the context of dialogues, conversations, conferences, and organizations. Fusion means interaction. Human relations require interactive experiences. No one is exempt from this matter. Whether introvert or extrovert, individuals experience interactions sometime in their lives. As an employee, an organizational leader, a company owner, an educator, a business person, and I can go on enumerating practically all walks of life. Human relations are basic in human interactions. The definition of human interactions may be governed to some extent by culture or even language, but there are no geographical boundaries except what the human resource will set. When two people are engaged in a dialogue, the field of experience is the field of connection. In a dialogue, there is a message sender and a message receiver. The interaction could be face-to-face or virtual. In any environmental context, there are fields of experiences between sender and receiver. The common field of experience in between the two members in a dialogue is where human relation works. This field is where understanding could ensue. It is also in the common field of experience that misunderstandings, conflicts, arguments can arise. In the same field, decision-making is active, just as conflict resolutions and solutions to problems can be generated. The grounding factor is human relations. Human relations is basic to keeping a human capital in a team or an organization connected. Conferences may look like people are disconnected while in an assembly. Actually, the fields of experiences are hovering about each attendee. The common fields of experiences are among those seated together that may share the same jobs. Members of such job-alike groups may have interconnected fields of common experiences. There is understanding and harmony while actively listening to the presenter. I might as well mention that the common fields of experience already established among job-alike groups could be the reason why they flock together during conferences. There is another common field of experience that exists between the presenter and the audience. Cultivated in the field is a complicated merging of the different facets of understanding. There is a common context on which harmonious understanding could be generated. This field of experience could be where decisions are born. Human relations are essential in decision-making processes. When all members of a team share a common understanding of the context, the path of decision-making is clear. When a leader presents a situation for decisions to be made for, he or she will explain the context first. The question and answer or Q&A time is where clarifications are made. This is part of the common field of experience between the leader and the team members. When understanding of the context is all connected among the team members, decisions are made clearly. This means that the fields of experiences among the team members, leader included, are all interconnected. The grounding factor is human relations. Emotional intelligence, or EI, is a factor of human relations. In an organization or in teams within an organization, EI allows productive communication. This was the situation explained beforehand in which a harmonious understanding of the context leads to decisions made, meaning to say the objectives are met. EI exists in the field of experience during interactions. EI allows human relations to work and connect the fields of experiences among the decision-making participants. Among the qualities of EI at work in communication that in turn qualify human interaction and connectivity is tolerance. This quality aids in the establishment of peaceful communication. In a similar premise, this quality aids in the establishment of productive decision-making processes. There are other facets such as resilience and flexibility. There are at least 5 assets of emotional intelligence that mingle in the various fields of experience: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and the skills of socialization. The following characterization of intelligence, emotional intelligence at work in the workplace, is by itself the qualification of human relations at work. Active listening, flexibility, resilience, patience, and tolerance work together in the various fields of experience. Creativity is motivated as it is respected. Creativity leads to change initiatives. Fields of experiences keep human relations at work, and workers support each other in the workplace. Human relations establish support entities. This makes collaboration as a functional factor in reaching a team's objectives or an organization's goals. Here are the takeaways from this short philosophical view of human relations in human resource management. Positive human relations are cultivated through mutual understanding. Fields of experiences can generate clarifications that resolve conflicts. Decision-making is aided by the connectivities among the various fields of human relation experiences. Emotional intelligence is an essential factor in the establishment of good human relations. Whether for profit, nonprofit, and in the fusion of both, individuals, groups, and organizations all need to manage human relations. Allow me to close this presentation with a repetition of my thanks to ASEA Honors, Silvan Online University Learning Our Soul, headed by Dr. Dave Marshall and his technology team, Sir Fredley Bucog, Sir Stephen Binaro, and the Negros Island Teacher Education Society, or KNIGHTS, Philippine Kenya Education Network, or PIN, both headed by Dr. Gina Banyur, and thanks to Google Scholar for the Google Images, Sailor.org for some concepts and topics that I explored, and OpenText resources. Thank you all, and good day.